Good evening, all. Firstly, I'm extremely excited to be here today with you in person after a couple of years in lockdown. So my name is Dominick Mondesir, and I'm a senior private capital analyst at PitchBook. So for those of you who are not familiar with PitchBook, PitchBook is a leading research company that specializes in providing data and research across the private capital markets, so most notably in the PE, VC, M&A, and emerging technology spaces via our software platform. So today we're going to be having a high-level look at how Nordic M&A activity performed in 2021. And some of the areas we're going to focus on is M&A. We're going to look at the deals landscape. We're going to look at M&A via sectors, regions. We're going to look at deal sizes and also cross-border activity. So jumping straight into it, Nordic M&A activity rebounded aggressively from the pandemic-induced slowdown of 2020 to hit new records in 2021. So as we see on the screen here, just over 2,000 deals closed, worth in aggregate 161 billion euros. So 2021 was really a special year for M&A. The stars aligned and everything that could possibly go right for deal makers did. Deal makers recognized they was operating in a once-in-a-lifetime market, and they certainly took advantage of this. We had the perfect storm of low interest rates. We had willing sellers taking advantage of heightened valuations. We had a quick vaccine rollout, and we had unprecedented stimulus in the market. In addition, across the Nordics, we had a very accommodative regulatory environment, and we also had the broad availability of debt and equity financing, which kept M&A aloft. Also across the Nordics, we saw a wave of domestic consolidation and also horizontal integration with companies, as companies in the Nordics tend to try and focus on being local champions as opposed to being European or global champions. And also what we saw is that companies really look to kind of accelerate their digital transformations via using M&A, and they also look to kind of enhance their operational capabilities via using M&A, and then also to better engage with their customer sets. So looking ahead in 2022, we definitely expect that Nordic M&A activity will remain aloft. However, we do think that it is likely to slow from the peak that it hit in 2021 for a few reasons. So right now, obviously, geopolitical tensions, are at decade highs, and none of us in this room exactly know when this is likely to abate. And then two, currently we're seeing the aggressive tightening of financial conditions. Interest rates are slowly moving upwards. We're seeing higher long-term and persistent inflation. Stimulus is reducing in the market. You've got supply chain bottlenecks, and we've also got soaring energy and food prices. So these factors will work to dampen M&A activity. All of that being said, we do expect the kind of two mega themes of digitization and sustainability will keep M&A active in 2022. As really companies look to optimize their portfolios and they really look to kind of build stability and resilience. I believe that resilience is going to be kind of a key theme in 2022 due to kind of all the uncertainty we're currently going through. And then finally, in the system, there's no structural issues right now. This could change with the Russia and Ukraine conflict. And as a result, we've got heightened liquidity in the system. So we've got kind of financial sponsors sitting on kind of record levels of dry powder. They're going to be kind of cautiously aggressive and be leaning into the markets. This will keep M&A activity high. We've also got corporates sitting on, large cash balance positions after a really successful 2021. And then finally, we've got kind of SPACs. We've got a number of SPACs sitting on the markets waiting to complete a deal within their 24-month time frame. Now moving on to Nordic M&A activity via size. So what we saw is that essentially the sheer volume of deals really drove M&A value to its record levels. And we can tell this from the fact that the median deal size had a modest uptick from 8.1 million in 2020 to 9.9 million in 2021. So as I said, it was the sheer volume of deals that really drove M&A value. And what we saw across the Nordics is that deal sizes under 100 million euros really contributed the bulk of M&A deal counts. Now moving on to Nordic M&A activity via sectors. The standout sector, really no surprises here, was certainly IT and tech. So what we've seen over the past decade is that Nordic IT M&A count has more than doubled over the past 10 years. And what we saw is that merging with software companies was certainly a standout theme, as software mergers and acquisitions account for 72% of overall IT M&A value. And we expect that's going to continue to kind of ebb upwards as the kind of global shift towards remote work and the adoption of technology really continues to accelerate. And what we're seeing is that no matter a company's kind of underlying industry, they're being forced to adopt technologies that, as I said earlier, enhances their operational capabilities, better engages their customer sets, and kind of builds it grows margins, productivity, and scale. And a good example of this was in the largest deal of the year, we saw Nexia Nets merge in the payment space across the Nordics, which is very much kind of a transformative scale play within the payments industry. And now more broadly looking at the Nordics is really considered one of a few kind of key tech hubs in Europe. And that's mainly because, the access to capital and talent in the region is very strong. It's got an accommodative regulatory environment. It very much has an environment that kind of encourages sustainable risk-taking. Its education kind of systems are extremely robust and very much has supportive infrastructure. And also, we've seen companies such as, Spotify, Just Eat, and Zettle by PayPal being founded in the Nordics region. So it really is kind of a hotbed for sustainable kind of tech innovation. And what we do expect is that IT M&A activity will continue to account for greater proportions of Nordic M&A in 2022, as the trends of digitization and growth are really irreversible. IT M&A tends to mean growth, and growth tends to translate into higher returns for all stakeholders. All of that being said, I believe that the mantra of growth at all costs is gone. I think we saw that in 2021, but I believe deal makers kind of in 2022 are going to be more focused on fundamentals and profitability of software companies due to the wide uncertainty we're currently seeing in the markets. Now, looking at Nordic M&A activity via region, what we saw is that Denmark actually had the largest growth in M&A activity from 2020 to 2021. But what we see is that Sweden really continued to contribute the bulk of M&A activity, and no real surprises there. So approximately 1 in 2 deals in the Nordics actually closed in Sweden. And that's mainly down to the fact that Sweden is the largest and fastest growing economy within the Nordics. Within Sweden, it very much had a strong kind of pandemic recovery, with GDP expected to grow around 5%, which will mean that Sweden's GDP is actually larger than what it was, pre-pandemic. And then we're also seeing that the notion that Swedish companies can actually translate into kind of European and global champions is swelling. And the main reason for this is really Klarna, which I'm sure kind of all of you are aware. They're the highest valued startup in Europe, and they're very much anticipated to be the kind of global leader in the buy now, pay later space. And they're currently valued at around, I believe, 50 billion euros. And then lastly, foreign direct investment tends to play an outsized role in kind of growing Nordic countries' GDP, and Sweden tends to see an outsized share of that foreign direct investment due to its kind of accommodative regulatory and business environment. Now moving on to Nordic M&A activity via type. So what really stood out to us was sponsor-backed M&A value has hiked nearly 3x over the past decade, and we expect sponsor-backed proportions of M&A to continue to grow for a few reasons. So what I like to say is that kind of private equity in the Nordics region is supersizing as kind of interest in the asset class continues to grow, and as access to the asset class continues to kind of be democratized. So what we're seeing is that large companies within the Nordics region are being backed by kind of domestic and international sponsors, and sponsors such as EQT, Triton, Alta Equity Partners, and Nordic Capital. These are big brand name sponsors who are really kind of propelling private equity's value proposition in the Nordics. And a few other reasons why kind of PE M&A activity hit new records in 2021 is one, kind of growing and record PE dry powder levels. So currently that sits at 90 billion euros. And that's only going to grow in 2022. EQT, I think they're in the market with like a 20 billion fund, which is expected to close this year. And this number is likely understated as we don't account for kind of co-investment capital that's sitting on the sidelines waiting to be deployed. And then also we had kind of the trends I spoke about earlier. We had cheap debt, we had strong leveraged lending markets, and we had willing sellers. So kind of looking ahead, PE's kind of proportions of M&A is expected to grow, and we mainly think that due to a few reasons. So what I would say is that fundraising is expected to remain strong. Debt, even though interest rates are moving upwards, they're moving upwards very slowly, so debt will remain historically cheap, which will fund deployment activity. And then we anticipate more companies within the Nordics, whether you're family-owned or entrepreneur-led business, will actually look to partner with private equity firms due to the fact that, you know, they can use PE firms as a kind of offensive capital to kind of turbocharge growth, or if you're an incumbent, you can use kind of PE capital to essentially maintain market share. And then finally, before I get off, I've run out of time now, Nordic M&A cross-border activity really made a comeback in 2021. So as you see from the chart here, since 2018, cross-border M&A value had been declining, but it raced to new records in 2021. And what we saw is that UK and US investors were really the predominant investors in Nordic companies. That's mainly because they very much see the environment as a stable political and regulatory environment. They see it as one of a few key tech hubs in Europe, and very much Nordics has very strong kind of macroeconomic fundamentals. But what kind of continues to account for the lion's share is certainly domestic M&A. That accounted for nearly 72% of M&A count in the region, and that's mainly because, you know, companies in the Nordics, they look to become local champions first and foremost before going on to become kind of European and global champions. And that's mainly because across Europe we've got, you know, fragmented regulatory regimes, we've got different kind of taste and fashion with consumers in Western Europe, Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, and also there's obviously language barriers there. So finally, the kind of key takeaways of this presentation: we expect Nordic M&A activity to slow in 2022, but remain historically active, really driven by kind of sustainability and digitalization trends. Enhancing operational capabilities, building resilience and growth will also drive M&A. IT, as I said earlier, will go into account for a rising share of activity. And then finally, we believe that sponsor-backed M&A will also go into account for a rising share. So thank you for listening to me today.